What would you do if the person you trusted most betrayed everything you believed in? This is the story of a courageous mother who stood up against her millionaire son and exposed his darkest secret in front of the world. The truth she revealed will leave you speechless. The room was alive with chatter, the air thick with the aroma of luxury perfumes and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. It was a grand event, a charity gala unlike any other. The city's most influential people mingled effortlessly, their laughter echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Everyone was there to celebrate success, wealth, and prestige, or so they thought. The sound of high heels clicking against the marble floor silenced the room. Heads turned toward the entrance as she appeared, a woman of quiet grace but undeniable strength. She didn't need to announce her presence. Her very demeanor commanded attention. Her back was straight, her steps deliberate, and her face unreadable, a perfect blend of elegance and resolve. She was no ordinary guest, though many in the crowd didn't know her by name. She wasn't there for the glitz or glamour. Her purpose was far more profound, and her determination radiated with every step she took. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, subtle and curious. Who is she? Why does she look so serious? The air grew heavier, anticipation thickening, as though everyone could feel something significant was about to happen. Her eyes scanned the room, her gaze sharp and unwavering. It wasn't the decorations or the grandeur she noticed, but the man at the center of it all, her son. He stood on the far end of the hall, surrounded by admirers, his tailored suit and confident smile painting a picture of perfection. The crowd around him hung on his every word, laughing and nodding in agreement. To everyone else, he was the epitome of success. But to her, he was the boy she had raised, a boy who had lost his way. Her chest tightened as she observed him from afar. The image of the man he had become clashed painfully with the memories of the boy he once was, kind, humble, and full of promise. She adjusted her shawl, masking the turmoil within her. Tonight wasn't the night for hesitation or sentimentality. She had come here for a reason, and there was no turning back. As she stepped further into the room, the crowd seemed to part instinctively, creating a path for her. The whispers grew louder, curiosity turning into intrigue. Her calm but purposeful demeanor was impossible to ignore. There was something in the way she carried herself, a quiet intensity that suggested she was here to say something, to do something, that no one would forget. The son caught sight of her then, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she noticed. He quickly regained his composure, offering a polite nod in her direction, as though acknowledging her presence was an obligation, not a choice. She didn't nod back. Instead, she held his gaze, her expression steady but filled with an unspoken challenge. The room grew quieter, the hum of conversation dying down, as more people began to sense that this woman's presence wasn't ordinary. The weight of her silence was louder than words, and her calm exterior hinted at a storm brewing beneath the surface. She reached the center of the hall, her eyes never leaving her son's, and for the first time that evening, the man who had everything looked uncertain. Everyone was watching now, their curiosity morphing into anticipation. The tension was palpable, hanging in the air like a taut string ready to snap. Still, she didn't speak, didn't rush. She let the moment stretch, knowing that her silence was building an impact words couldn't yet achieve. And then, with a voice calm but resonating with authority, she finally broke the silence. "I'm here to tell the truth," she said, her words slicing through the room like a knife. The whispers ceased instantly, replaced by a stunned, collective hush. Every eye in the room was on her now, and every breath held. Her son's confident mask cracked slightly, his posture stiffening. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. The room belonged to her now, her calm yet commanding presence, silencing even the most skeptical onlooker. What she was about to reveal would shatter everything, and no one in that room, not even her son, was prepared for it. As the mother stood at the center of the grand hall, her determined gaze never leaving her son, memories began to flood her mind. Each one was a piece of the puzzle, fragments of a relationship that had once been built on love and trust, but now stood fractured by distance and unspoken truths. She remembered the first time she sensed the change in him. It was at a family dinner, years ago, when he had just begun to taste success. The table was filled with laughter and chatter, but her son seemed distant, his focus glued to his phone. When she gently reminded him to join the conversation, he brushed her off with a tight smile. "It's work, Mama," he had said, his tone clipped. It wasn't the words that stung, but the way he said them, dismissive, as if her concerns no longer mattered. Another memory surfaced, a quiet afternoon when she had visited his office unannounced. She wanted to surprise him with homemade food, a small gesture of love she had always cherished. But when she arrived, she was met with a frosty reception. His assistant had looked uneasy, whispering something hurriedly into the phone before letting her in. Inside, her son had stood from his imposing desk, his face a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "You should have called first," he said, his voice polite but cold. The warmth she once knew in him felt like a distant memory. There was also the time she had noticed the change in how he spoke about his life. He no longer mentioned the family values she had instilled in him. Instead, his words revolved around deals, profits, and maintaining his image. When she had gently asked him if he was happy, his response had been evasive, almost rehearsed. "Of course, Mama. Everything is going according to plan," he had said, but his eyes betrayed something else, a shadow of unease, of something he was unwilling to share. The tension between them had only grown as the years passed. She recalled a heated conversation they had in her modest kitchen, a place that had once been filled with warmth and laughter. "You've changed," she had said, her voice trembling with emotion. "This isn't the boy I raised." Her son had sighed, his frustration barely concealed. "People change, Mama. It's called progress. Maybe you just don't understand the world I live in now." Those words had cut deeper than he realized. She wasn't angry about his success. She had prayed for it, worked tirelessly to support him, and celebrated his achievements. But what she couldn't accept was the way success had consumed him, pulling him further away from the values and the person he used to be. The memories played like a montage in her mind as she stood in the present, watching her son in his element, surrounded by admirers. To everyone else, he was the picture of perfection, a self-made millionaire, confident and poised. But to her, he was still the boy who had once run to her for comfort after scraping his knee, who had promised to take care of her when he grew up. That boy seemed like a ghost now, replaced by a man she could barely recognize. Her chest tightened as another memory surfaced, a moment that solidified her decision to confront him. It was a family gathering, not long ago. She had overheard a conversation between him and one of his colleagues. The colleague had praised him for a lucrative deal, but there was something in her son's response that made her blood run cold. "It's not about right or wrong," he had said. "It's about winning." That night, she had lain awake staring at the ceiling, her heart heavy with worry. She knew there was more to his success than he let on, and the weight of what she suspected had been crushing her ever since. Now, standing in the grand hall, she felt the culmination of all those moments, every cold response, every dismissive comment, every sign of a man drifting further from the values she had instilled. The tension between them wasn't just about their differences. It was about the secrets he was keeping, secrets that had driven a wedge between them. Her son glanced at her again, his confident demeanor faltering for just a second. She caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, and in that moment she knew he felt it too, the rift between them, the weight of everything left unsaid. The stage was set. The truth, long buried beneath ambition and pride, was about to surface. And as the mother held her ground, she silently vowed that no matter how painful it would be, the time had come to expose it all. He wasn't born into wealth, in fact, far from it. The son grew up in a small, modest home where every corner spoke of resilience and hard work. His mother, a single parent, had poured every ounce of her energy into ensuring he had a better future than the one she had. She worked long hours as a seamstress, stitching together dreams for a life she hoped her son would one day lead. Even as a young boy, he showed signs of exceptional intelligence. He excelled in school, often bringing home certificates and medals that his mother proudly displayed on the worn-out shelves of their home. But it wasn't just academics that set him apart. It was his determination. While other children played in the streets, he spent hours reading books borrowed from the local library, devouring knowledge and dreaming of a life beyond the narrow confines of their neighborhood. His ambition became even more evident as he grew older. While his peers were content with ordinary aspirations, he wanted more. He often told his mother, "One day I'll make you proud, Mama. I'll give you the life you deserve." And she believed him. She saw the fire in his eyes, the drive that refused to be dimmed by their humble circumstances. After graduating from high school with top marks, he earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. It was a turning point in his life, the moment when he stepped into a world far removed from the one he had always known. The university campus was sprawling, filled with students from affluent families, their lives seemingly effortless. At first he felt like an outsider, but he quickly adapted. His intelligence and charm helped him fit in, and soon he was excelling not just academically, but socially as well. During his time at university, he discovered his knack for business. What began as small projects, helping classmates with assignments in exchange for pocket money, soon evolved into bigger ventures. He started a small online business, selling customized products, and to his surprise, it took off. By the time he graduated, he had saved enough to start his first official company. It wasn't easy, but he thrived on the challenges. He spent sleepless nights working on ideas, building connections, and pitching his vision to anyone who would listen. His mother watched from the sidelines, beaming with pride. She knew the sacrifices they had both made were finally paying off. And then it happened. His first big break. A major investor believed in his startup and poured funds into the business. From there, his life transformed. Success followed success, and before long, he was running multiple companies, each more lucrative than the last. His name began appearing in business magazines, hailed as a visionary entrepreneur. He was invited to exclusive events, rubbing shoulders with the city's elite. The boy who had once walked to school in worn-out shoes was now a millionaire with a fleet of luxury cars and a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city. But with success came change. His schedule grew busier and his life more extravagant. Lavish parties, high-profile deals, and the relentless pursuit of more took center stage. He rarely visited the small home where he had grown up, and when he did, he seemed like a stranger, dressed in tailored suits, talking about stock markets and international ventures. His mother noticed the change. The warmth in his voice had been replaced with a sharpness, a cool detachment that wasn't there before. He still loved her. She could see it in the expensive gifts he sent and the financial support he provided. But it was as if the boy she had raised had been swallowed by the man he had become. Despite her concerns, she couldn't help but admire his success. He had achieved everything he had set out to do, and in many ways he was the embodiment of her sacrifices and prayers. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She had taught him to value integrity, kindness, and humility, yet the man he had become seemed so far removed from those lessons. And so, while the world saw him as a self-made millionaire, a man who had built an empire from nothing, his mother saw the cracks in his perfect image. She saw the cost of his success, not just in their relationship, but in the values he had once held dear. What she didn't know, however, was just how deep those cracks ran, and the secrets they were hiding. Those would come to light soon enough, and when they did, the world would see a side of him that no amount of wealth could shield. The cracks in his perfect image began to show, not to the public, but to the one person who had known him the longest, his mother. To the outside world, he was a polished, successful entrepreneur, admired and envied in equal measure. But to her, he was a son she barely recognized anymore. It started with his attitude. Success had brought him confidence, but over time, that confidence turned into arrogance. He spoke about himself as if he were untouchable, a man who had risen above everyone else. "People like me don't waste time on small problems," he would say casually, dismissing concerns with a wave of his hand. His tone carried a superiority that stung, especially when it was directed at his mother. There was a time when he would call her every evening, asking for advice, sharing his worries, and seeking her approval. But those calls became less frequent, replaced by short, perfunctory check-ins. "I'm busy, Mama," he would say when she asked why he hadn't visited. "You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." The words hurt more than she let on, not because he was busy, but because he no longer seemed to value her wisdom or the principles she had taught him. One particular incident stood out in her memory. It was her birthday, and she had spent the day hoping he would call or visit. Instead, a courier arrived with an extravagant gift, a designer handbag worth more than she could imagine. It was beautiful, but it felt impersonal, a substitute for his presence. When she called to thank him, her voice laced with disappointment, he brushed it off. "Mama, I thought you'd like it. Isn't that what matters?" But it wasn't just his attitude toward her that troubled her. She began to notice a shift in his values, the ones she had worked so hard to instill in him. Humility, integrity, and kindness were traits she had always believed were his foundation. Yet, as his wealth grew, so did his disregard for those principles. She overheard him one evening during a rare visit, speaking on the phone about a business deal. His tone was sharp, his words cutting. "It doesn't matter if it's fair," he had said. "What matters is that we win." The phrase echoed in her mind long after the call ended. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it, with such conviction, as if morality was an inconvenience rather than a guiding force. Another time, during a family gathering, his arrogance was on full display. Relatives who once adored him now found his demeanor off-putting. He talked incessantly about his achievements, his wealth, his plans, but never once asked how others were doing. When a cousin brought up a local charity needing help, he dismissed it outright. "Charities don't need money, they need smarter people running them," he quipped with a laugh, oblivious to the discomfort in the room. His mother watched these moments in silence, her heart heavy with disappointment. This wasn't the boy she had raised, the boy who once gave half his lunch to a classmate who didn't have any food. She had taught him that success meant nothing if it wasn't shared, that wealth should be a tool to uplift others, not a weapon to belittle them. But somewhere along the way, those lessons had been lost. The most painful moment came during a conversation they had in her small kitchen. She had asked him about his plans for the future, hoping to hear something that reflected the values he once held. Instead, he spoke only of expansion, profit, and prestige. "You should be proud of me, Mama," he said, his tone defensive when she hesitated to respond. "I've worked hard to get here." "I am proud of your success," she replied gently, her voice trembling. "But what I'm not proud of is how it's changed you. Your success means nothing if you've forgotten who you are." Her words had hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. He had said nothing, choosing instead to leave the conversation unfinished. But she knew they had struck a nerve. She had seen it in his eyes, the flicker of guilt, quickly replaced by the mask of indifference. These small incidents, each seemingly insignificant on their own, painted a larger picture of a man who had lost touch with the very values that had shaped him. To his mother, it wasn't his wealth or success that mattered. It was the person he was becoming, a person driven by ambition, but devoid of the compassion and humility that once defined him. What she didn't yet realize, however, was that these cracks in his image weren't just superficial. Beneath them lay secrets far darker than she could imagine, secrets that would soon come to light and shatter the illusion entirely. She had never planned to raise him alone. Life, however, had a way of testing her in ways she never expected. His father's sudden passing left her shattered, her world upended overnight. But in her arms she held her infant son, a reminder that no matter how broken she felt, she had a reason to keep going. From that moment, she vowed to give him everything, even if it meant sacrificing herself in the process. Their home was small, with peeling paint and creaky floors, but it was filled with love. She worked tirelessly, stitching clothes late into the night as a seamstress, her hands roughened by years of labor. The whir of the sewing machine was a constant soundtrack to her life, a reminder of the hours she poured into making ends meet. Every stitch was a step closer to putting food on the table, paying school fees, and ensuring her son had what he needed. There were days when exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders, but she never let him see it. She wanted him to feel secure, to believe that their little world was enough. On nights when he struggled to sleep, she would sit by his bedside, telling him stories of brave heroes and extraordinary adventures. In those quiet moments, she reminded him that even in their modest circumstances, he could dream big. Her sacrifices weren't limited to physical labor. She gave up her dreams too. There was a time when she dreamed of becoming a teacher, of standing in front of a classroom and inspiring young minds. But those dreams had to be set aside the moment she became both mother and father to her son. She didn't regret it. He was her world, and his future mattered more than anything. The struggles weren't just financial. She often faced judgment from others who questioned how a single mother could raise a child alone. The whispers of doubt and unsolicited advice came from every direction, but she refused to let them shake her resolve. "You'll see," she would tell herself in the quiet of the night. "He will grow up to be someone I can be proud of." And proud she was. From the moment he started school, she saw his potential. He was intelligent, curious, and eager to learn. She attended every parent-teacher meeting, often walking miles to get there because she couldn't afford transportation. Her heart swelled with pride every time a teacher praised his performance, every time he brought home an award or certificate. But those moments of pride came with their own sacrifices. There were times she went without new clothes or a decent meal so he could have what he needed for school. When he asked for a new backpack one year, she smiled and said, "Of course," even though she knew it meant working extra hours to afford it. She didn't mind. Every smile on his face made the sacrifices worth it. As he grew older, she continued to put his needs above her own. When he wanted to attend a prestigious university, she did everything in her power to make it happen. She sold what little jewelry she had, borrowed money from friends, and worked harder than ever to ensure he could follow his dreams. She would often joke, "My wealth isn't in gold or money, it's in you." And she meant it. Her son's achievements became her greatest joy. Each milestone he reached felt like a victory for both of them. But as he climbed higher, she couldn't help but notice the distance growing between them. The warm, close bond they once shared began to feel strained. She reminded herself that it was natural. He was busy building his life, chasing success. Still, there were nights when she sat alone in their quiet home, staring at old photographs and wondering if he still remembered the sacrifices that had brought him to where he was. Her sacrifices had shaped him, molded him into the man he had become. But now, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had left those sacrifices behind, buried them under the weight of his ambition. And as much as she wanted to believe in the boy she had raised, she couldn't ignore the growing fear that the man he had become was someone she didn't fully recognize. Little did she know, the struggles she had endured and the sacrifices she had made were about to be overshadowed by something far more painful, the discovery of a truth that would test not only her love for her son, but everything she believed about the person he had become. The signs were small at first, little things that might have seemed inconsequential to anyone else. But to a mother who had spent her life watching her son grow, each one felt like a crack in the foundation of the person she thought she knew. It began with the phone calls. Whenever she visited, his phone would ring incessantly. He would glance at the screen, his expression tightening, before stepping away to answer. "It's just work, Mama," he would say when she asked about it. But his tone was distant, and the way he avoided her eyes made her uneasy. The conversations were always hushed, his words clipped and cautious, as though he didn't want anyone to overhear. She couldn't help but wonder, what kind of work required such secrecy? Then there were the meetings. He often mentioned late-night negotiations or urgent business deals that kept him away for days. When she asked for details, his answers were vague. "You wouldn't understand, Mama," he'd say with a dismissive wave of his hand. It wasn't the lack of detail that hurt. It was the way he seemed to think she didn't deserve to know. The boy who once told her everything now treated her questions as an inconvenience. One afternoon, during one of her rare visits to his luxurious penthouse, she noticed a stack of documents on his desk. They were contracts, but something about them caught her eye. The terms seemed unusually aggressive, favoring his company at the expense of others. She didn't understand all the legal jargon, but the predatory nature of the deals was clear. When she asked him about them, he simply shrugged. "It's business, Mama. You have to be tough to survive." That explanation didn't sit well with her. Tough, yes, but at what cost? She had taught him to be fair, to treat others with respect, and to value integrity over profit. Yet here he was, speaking about his success as though it justified any means. She couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Had she failed to instill those values deeply enough? Or had the world he now inhabited stripped them away? Her unease deepened when she overheard a conversation he had with one of his business partners. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried from the study. "If they can't meet the terms, it's their problem, not ours," her son said, his tone firm, almost cold. "We're here to win, not to hold their hand." The words made her stomach turn. Was this the same boy who used to share his lunch with classmates who didn't have enough to eat? It wasn't just his professional life that raised questions. She noticed changes in his behavior around her too. He was less patient, less attentive. Where he once sat with her for hours, sharing stories and listening to her advice, now he seemed distracted, always checking his phone or glancing at his watch. The warmth in his voice, the genuine laughter they used to share, it was all fading, replaced by a polished but hollow demeanor. One evening, she finally confronted him. "You're not the same," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You've changed, and not in a way I recognize." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of frustration and guilt. "Mama, I'm doing what I have to do. The world isn't as simple as you think." Her heart sank. "The world may not be simple, but right and wrong still exist," she replied. "You used to know that." He didn't answer, and the silence between them was louder than any argument. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between the boy she had raised and the man he had become, but he turned away, ending the conversation before it could go any further. That night, as she sat alone in her modest home, her mind raced with worry. She wanted to believe that his heart was still good, that the son she had raised was still there beneath the layers of ambition and success. But the signs were undeniable. His choices, his attitude, his values, they were all shifting, and not for the better. What troubled her most wasn't the change itself, but the growing distance between them. He was shutting her out, keeping secrets, and making decisions that felt foreign to the values they once shared. She felt like she was losing him, not to another person, but to the very success he had worked so hard to achieve. Her unease grew heavier with each passing day, but little did she know the worst was yet to come. The secrets her son was keeping weren't just about business or ambition. They were far darker, far more personal. And soon, those secrets would come to light, threatening to unravel everything she thought she knew about the boy she had raised. One late evening, the mother found herself seated in her small living room, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. Her mind was restless, swirling with all the signs she had noticed over the years. The phone calls, the vague answers, the hardened demeanor, it all painted a picture, but one she couldn't quite make sense of. Something wasn't right, and the nagging feeling in her heart refused to be silenced. Her thoughts were interrupted by the vibration of her phone. It was a message from an old acquaintance, someone who had once worked closely with her son. The message was brief, but ominous. "I thought you should know what's going on. It's about your son." Attached was a link to an article. Her hands trembled as she clicked the link. The article loaded slowly, her heart pounding with anticipation. When the headline appeared, her breath hitched. "Prominent millionaire tied to questionable business practices and financial fraud." She stared at the words, her mind reeling. The article detailed allegations against her son, reports of unethical deals, under-the-table agreements, and exploitation of smaller companies. It mentioned lawsuits, anonymous whistleblowers, and investigations into his empire. Her son's name was mentioned repeatedly, painted as the mastermind behind these schemes. At first, she refused to believe it. This couldn't be her son, the boy she had raised to value honesty and integrity. But as she read further, the details became impossible to dismiss. There were statements from former employees, accounts of his ruthless tactics, and even leaked documents that appeared to validate the claims. Her mind raced back to the contracts she had seen on his desk, the phone calls he had taken in hushed tones, and the cold, dismissive attitude he had adopted toward anyone who questioned him. The pieces began to fall into place, each one fitting perfectly into the puzzle she had been too afraid to solve. Determined to confront the truth head-on, she began digging deeper. She searched for more articles, each one revealing more damning evidence. She called the old acquaintance, her voice trembling as she asked for details. The person hesitated, but eventually told her everything they knew. How her son had used intimidation and manipulation to secure deals, how he had destroyed smaller businesses to expand his own empire, and how his actions had left countless people in financial ruin. Her heart broke with every word. This wasn't just about unethical business practices. It was about the kind of man her son had become. The boy she had raised to help others, to stand for what was right, had become someone she could barely recognize. But the most painful discovery came when she found an anonymous message board where former employees and business associates shared their experiences. Among the posts was a story from a young woman who claimed her small family business had been destroyed by her son's company. "We trusted him," the post read. "We believed in his promises, and he left us with nothing." Tears streamed down her face as she read the words. The weight of the betrayal, of the man her son had become, pressed down on her like a heavy stone. She wanted to turn away, to pretend she hadn't seen any of it, but she couldn't. The truth was undeniable, and it was staring her in the face. The final piece of the puzzle came when she found a folder of documents on her son's laptop during a visit to his home. He had left the laptop open on the kitchen counter while he took a call in the other room. Her curiosity, fueled by the articles she had read, got the better of her. She clicked on the folder, and what she saw left her breathless. There were spreadsheets, emails, and contracts, all confirming the allegations she had read. It wasn't speculation, it was real. Her hands shook as she closed the laptop and stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. She had found the proof she never wanted to see, and now she had to decide what to do with it. The son returned to the room, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. "Mama, is everything okay?" he asked, noticing the pale look on her face. She nodded faintly, forcing herself to remain calm. But in her heart, she knew this was a turning point. The boy she had raised, the man she had loved so deeply, had built his empire on lies and betrayal, and now the truth was hers to carry. For the first time, she felt the weight of the decision ahead of her, whether to protect her son or expose the truth no matter the cost. The stage was set for the confrontation that would change everything. Later that evening, as the son sat in his luxurious living room scrolling through his phone, he didn't notice his mother standing silently in the doorway. Her heart was heavy, the proof of his actions weighing on her like an unbearable burden. For years, she had ignored the signs, made excuses for him, and held on to the belief that her son was still the kind-hearted boy she had raised. But now the truth was undeniable, and she couldn't stay silent any longer. She cleared her throat softly, and he looked up, startled. "Mama, you're still here?" he asked, setting his phone down on the coffee table. She stepped into the room, her expression serious, her voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." He furrowed his brow, leaning back in his chair. "About what? Is everything okay?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the coffee table, placing her hands on its edge to steady herself. "I know what you've been doing," she said quietly, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay composed. Her son's face stiffened, his casual demeanor fading. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone cautious. "The articles, the allegations, the evidence," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "I've seen it all. The contracts, the emails. I know what you've done to those people, to those businesses. I know how you've built your success." He sat up straighter, his expression hardening. "Mama, you don't understand," he said, his voice laced with irritation. "Those articles are exaggerations. People love to talk, to make up stories. You can't believe everything you read." She shook her head, her hands tightening into fists. "Don't lie to me, not now. I've seen the proof with my own eyes, the contracts on your laptop, the messages from people you've hurt. Is this what success means to you? Destroying others to get ahead?" His jaw clenched and he stood abruptly, towering over her. "You don't get it, Mama. This is how the world works. If I don't do it, someone else will. It's not personal. It's business." "Not personal?" she repeated, her voice rising with anger. "Do you hear yourself? You've ruined lives, destroyed families. Is that what I taught you? To put profit above people?" He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Do you think it's easy to stay on top, to keep everything I've built? I've worked too hard to let it all fall apart because of some moral high ground." Her heart broke at his words, at the man he had become. "You've worked hard, yes," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "But at what cost? Look at what you've turned into. This isn't the boy I raised. This isn't the man I wanted you to be." His expression darkened and his tone grew sharp. "You don't know what it's like to live in my world, Mama. You've never had to deal with this level of responsibility. You think it's all black and white, but it's not. You don't know what's at stake." "I know exactly what's at stake," she snapped, her voice shaking with both anger and sorrow. "Your soul, your values, everything that once made you a good man. You're losing yourself, and you don't even see it." He turned away from her, pacing the room, his hands clenched into fists. "Enough, Mama," he said, his voice cold. "I don't need a lecture. I've come too far to let anyone, even you, tear me down." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to back down. "I'm not trying to tear you down. I'm trying to save you from yourself. If you continue down this path, you'll lose everything that truly matters." He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes blazing with anger. "This conversation is over," he said firmly. "You don't understand my life, and you never will." Her heart shattered at his words, at the finality in his tone. For a moment, she considered leaving, walking away from the confrontation, and letting him deal with the consequences of his actions on his own. But as she looked at him, her son, the boy she had sacrificed so much for, she realized she couldn't stay silent. "No," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "This isn't over. If you won't listen to me in private, I'll make sure you have no choice but to face the truth in public." His eyes widened, the confidence on his face replaced by shock. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the world deserves to know who you really are," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "If you won't change, I'll make sure the truth comes out, not for revenge, but because it's the right thing to do." The room fell silent, the tension between them palpable. Her son stared at her, his expression a mix of disbelief and anger. For the first time he realized that his mother, the one person he thought would always stand by him, was willing to take a stand against him for the sake of what was right. She turned and walked toward the door, her shoulders heavy with the weight of what she had decided. But as she stepped out of the room, a flicker of strength lit up inside her. She had done all she could to guide him privately. Now it was time to take a bolder step, no matter the cost. The grand ballroom sparkled with opulence, from the cascading chandeliers to the polished marble floors that reflected the glow of golden light. It was an event unlike any other, a charity gala hosted by her son, with the city's most powerful and influential figures in attendance. The air was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and murmurs of admiration as guests marveled at the success of the man who had seemingly achieved everything. At the center of it all stood her son, commanding attention with his sharp suit and confident smile. He moved through the crowd with ease, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, a picture of charm and authority. To everyone present, he was a shining example of success, a self-made millionaire who had risen above humble beginnings to claim his place at the top. But to her, standing quietly in the shadows, he was something else entirely, a man who had lost his way, his image built on lies and betrayal. As the evening progressed, the spotlight shifted to the stage, where he was set to deliver his keynote speech. The audience fell silent as he stepped up to the podium, his smile widening as he took in the sea of faces before him. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice smooth and commanding. "It's an honor to host such an incredible group of people, united by a shared commitment to making a difference." The applause was deafening, echoing through the grand hall as he continued to speak. He praised the generosity of the attendees, spoke of his company's contributions to the community, and painted a glowing picture of his achievements. But every word he spoke only deepened the ache in his mother's heart. She knew the truth behind the facade, the lies woven into every sentence, and the people who had suffered as a result of his so-called success. Her hands tightened into fists as she stood at the back of the room, her resolve hardening with every passing moment. This was it, the moment she had dreaded, yet knew was inevitable. She had tried to reason with him privately, to guide him back to the values he had abandoned. But he had refused to listen, leaving her with no choice but to take a stand here, in front of everyone. As he paused to take a sip of water, she stepped forward, her heart pounding. The soft click of her shoes against the marble floor seemed deafening in the silence, and heads turned as guests noticed her making her way toward the stage. Her son glanced in her direction, his confident demeanor faltering for just a moment as he recognized her. "Mama," he said, his voice carrying a note of confusion as she reached the front of the room. "What are you doing?" The room was silent now, the air thick with tension as everyone watched her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before meeting his gaze. "I'm here to speak the truth," she said, her voice calm but firm. A murmur rippled through the crowd as she turned to address them. "You all see him as a man of success, a man of integrity," she began, her voice unwavering despite the storm of emotions inside her. "But I can't stand here and let you believe a lie. The truth is that his success has come at a cost he has hidden from you and from himself." Her son stepped forward, panic flashing across his face. "Mama, stop this," he said urgently, his voice low. "Not here." She ignored him, her focus on the crowd. "He has built his empire on the backs of others, exploiting those who trusted him, ruining families and livelihoods to get ahead. I've seen the contracts, the deals, the lies, and I can no longer stay silent." The room was stunned into silence, the weight of her words settling over the guests like a heavy fog. Whispers began to break out, sharp and incredulous, as the guests processed what they had just heard. Her son's face was pale, his confidence shattered. "This isn't true," he stammered, his voice losing its usual authority. "She's confused. She doesn't know what she's talking about." She turned to him, her eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. "Don't insult me by denying it," she said quietly. "I've seen the proof with my own eyes. I raised you to be better than this. But somewhere along the way, you lost yourself." He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The room was watching him now, their admiration replaced with doubt and judgment. His mother's calm, steady voice had shattered the illusion he had worked so hard to maintain. "I didn't do this to ruin you," she said, her voice softening as she addressed him directly. "I did this because I love you, because I believe there's still a part of you that remembers the boy who wanted to make the world a better place. But until you face the truth, you can never truly move forward." She stepped back, her message delivered, leaving him to face the consequences of his choices. The room remained silent, the tension almost unbearable, as the son stood frozen at the podium, his mask of confidence completely gone. In that moment, the perfect image he had crafted was shattered, and the truth lay bare for all to see. It was the beginning of his reckoning, and the weight of his mother's words would stay with him long after the event had ended. The silence in the room was deafening, the weight of the mother's words hanging heavily in the air. Every eye was on her son, waiting for his response. He stood frozen behind the podium, his grip tightening around its edges, his composed facade slipping with every passing second. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. "Mama," he began, his voice trembling slightly, but he quickly caught himself, replacing the quiver with a sharper tone. "I don't know why you're saying these things, but this isn't the place for it." The mother didn't flinch, her calm gaze meeting his. "If not here, then where?" she replied, her voice steady. "You left me no choice." He clenched his jaw, turning to the audience, his polished charisma struggling to reassert itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, forcing a tight smile, "I apologize for this unexpected interruption. My mother is clearly mistaken. She doesn't have all the facts." The room remained eerily quiet, the audience too stunned to react. The murmurs that had begun earlier were now replaced with an uneasy tension. His words didn't land the way they usually did. The confidence he exuded felt forced, hollow. "Mistaken?" his mother said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Do you think I would come here, in front of all these people, without knowing the truth?" He turned back to her, his expression darkening. "You don't understand the complexities of my work," he said defensively. "You've always lived in a simple world, Mama. This is business. Things aren't black and white." "Business?" she shot back, her voice rising slightly but still controlled. "Is that what you call ruining lives? Exploiting people who trusted you? Do you think hiding behind the word business makes it any less wrong?" His composure cracked further, and his frustration boiled over. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, his voice echoing through the room. The sharpness of his tone startled the audience, and whispers began to ripple once again. "You've seen bits and pieces, contracts, emails, things you don't understand. You don't know what it takes to succeed at this level." "I know enough," she replied firmly, her voice unwavering despite his rising anger. "Enough to know that you've lost sight of who you are. Enough to know that this success you're so proud of has come at too great a cost." His face flushed with anger, and he shook his head, pacing behind the podium like a caged animal. "This isn't fair," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Then louder, addressing the room, "My mother doesn't understand the pressure I'm under. The expectations, the responsibilities. It's easy to judge when you're not the one who has to deliver." The crowd watched in stunned silence as he continued, his voice rising with desperation. "Do you think any of this is easy? Do you think building an empire happens without sacrifices? I've done what I had to do to survive, to thrive. And now you stand here, trying to tear it all down?" "Sacrifices?" his mother interrupted, her voice tinged with both sorrow and disappointment. "Whose sacrifices, my son? Yours, or the people you've trampled on to get here?" Her words landed like a hammer blow, and his defenses crumbled further. His eyes darted around the room, searching for support among the stunned faces of his guests. But there was none. The admiration they once held for him had been replaced with doubt, suspicion, and in some cases outright disgust. Desperation took hold, and he tried to salvage what he could. "This is all being blown out of proportion," he said, his voice almost pleading now. Yes, I've made difficult decisions, but they were necessary. Everything I've done has been for the greater good, creating jobs, driving innovation, building something bigger than myself. But his words felt empty, and he seemed to realize it. The audience didn't applaud, didn't murmur in agreement. They simply watched, their silence speaking louder than anything else. His mother stepped forward, her gaze softening as she spoke. You're trying to justify what you've done, but deep down, you know the truth. This isn't about pressure or responsibility, it's about choices. Choices you made, knowing the harm they would cause. You had the power to do good, and instead, you chose this. Her words hit him harder than any accusation, and for a moment he looked like the boy she once knew, vulnerable, unsure, and afraid. But just as quickly the mask returned, and he straightened his shoulders, his anger flaring one last time. This isn't over, he said coldly, his voice trembling with both anger and fear. You don't understand the damage you've done tonight, Mama. You've ruined everything. No, she replied softly, her eyes filled with tears. You did that yourself. The room was silent once more, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. The son stood at the podium, his image shattered, his carefully crafted world unraveling before his eyes. And as his mother turned and walked away, her steps slow but steady, the weight of her actions settled over the room, leaving everyone, including her son, to grapple with the truth she had so bravely exposed. The fallout was swift and merciless. News of the mother's public revelations spread like wildfire, leaving no corner of her son's once flawless image untouched. The same people who had clapped for him at charity events and praised his achievements now whispered behind his back, their admiration replaced with judgment and disdain. Headlines dominated the news. Millionaire's dark secrets exposed by his own mother, fraud and betrayal behind the success, and the fall of a self-made tycoon. Every detail of his shady business practices, his exploitation of smaller companies, and his manipulative tactics was dissected and discussed. Leaked documents and insider accounts emerged, corroborating the mother's claims and painting a picture of a man whose empire had been built on lies. His business associates, once eager to align themselves with his success, began to distance themselves. Contracts were withdrawn, deals fell apart, and investors pulled out. No one wanted to be associated with the scandal. His company's stock plummeted, wiping out millions overnight. The office that once buzzed with activity and confidence now felt like a ghost town, employees leaving in droves as the future of the business became uncertain. But the professional damage was only part of the story. The personal toll was even greater. Friends who had once surrounded him, enjoying his wealth and status, disappeared without a trace. Invitations to exclusive events dried up, and the calls and messages that used to flood his phone stopped altogether. The people he had considered close turned their backs, unwilling to be tied to his crumbling reputation. At home, the isolation was even more suffocating. His mother, the one person who had always stood by him, had made her stance clear. She wasn't there to offer comfort or excuses this time. Her absence was a reminder of the choices he had made, the lines he had crossed. For the first time in his life, he was truly alone. He tried to salvage what he could, issuing a carefully worded statement to the press. I have always acted with the best intentions, he wrote. And while mistakes may have been made, my commitment to creating opportunities and giving back to the community remains unwavering. But the words rang hollow. The damage had been done, and no statement could undo the loss of trust. His name became a cautionary tale, whispered in boardrooms and social circles as an example of how ambition, unchecked by ethics, could lead to downfall. The luxury and power he had once wielded felt meaningless now, overshadowed by the weight of his actions. In the solitude of his penthouse, he found himself haunted by memories of his mother's words. You've lost sight of who you are, she had said. The truth of those words gnawed at him, each one a reminder of the boy he had been and the man he had become. The silence in his home was deafening, the laughter of friends, the hum of work, the constant buzz of activity. All of it was gone. He was left alone with his thoughts, staring out at the city skyline, wondering how he had let it all slip away. His wealth, his relationships, his integrity, everything had crumbled, and for the first time he realized just how fragile it all had been. As the days turned into weeks, the isolation deepened. Calls from lawyers and creditors replaced the messages of admiration he had once received. The world he had built was gone, and with it, the image he had worked so hard to maintain. What remained was a man stripped of his pretense, forced to confront the wreckage of his life and the choices that had led him there. But amidst the silence and the solitude, a question lingered in his mind. Was it too late to rebuild, to find redemption? Or was the man he had become destined to live in the shadow of his own downfall? For now, all he could do was face the consequences and hope that somewhere, somehow, he could find a way back to the values he had once abandoned. Sitting alone in the dimly lit living room of his once bustling penthouse, the sun stared out at the city skyline. The view that had once filled him with pride now seemed cold and distant, a mocking reminder of everything he had lost. The silence around him was oppressive, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock, a sound he had never noticed before, but now felt deafening in its monotony. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands covering his face. For the first time in years there was no noise to drown out his thoughts, no meetings, no calls, no admirers to shield him from the harsh truth. He was alone, left with nothing but his memories and the haunting realization of what he had become. Her words echoed in his mind, sharp and unrelenting. "You've lost sight of who you are." At the time, he had dismissed them, too consumed by his ambition to hear the truth in her voice. But now, in the emptiness of his solitude, those words took on a weight he could no longer ignore. He thought back to the beginning, to the boy he once was, the boy who had promised to take care of his mother, to honor her sacrifices, to make her proud. That boy had been driven by love, not greed, by a desire to lift his family out of hardship, not by a hunger for power. Somewhere along the way he had lost that boy, buried him beneath layers of ambition and arrogance. The memories came flooding back, the late-night phone calls she used to wait for, the pride in her voice when he shared his achievements, the quiet meals where she listened intently, her eyes filled with unconditional love. And then came the memories of the cracks that had formed between them, the dismissive comments, the cold replies, the way he had pushed her away when she questioned his choices. He thought about the sacrifices she had made, the dreams she had given up so he could pursue his own. She had worked tirelessly, never once complaining, always putting him first. And yet, when she needed him to hold on to the values she had taught him, he had failed her. He had betrayed her trust, not just through his actions, but by becoming someone she could no longer recognize. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized the depth of the pain he had caused her. She hadn't exposed him to ruin him. She had done it because she loved him, because she believed he could be better. She had stood in front of the world and spoken the truth, not out of malice, but out of a desperate hope that he would finally see the path he was on. For years, he had convinced himself that his choices were justified, that the ends always justified the means. But now, sitting in the wreckage of his life, he saw the truth. The money, the power, the prestige, it had all been hollow, a poor substitute for the values he had abandoned and the relationships he had damaged. He reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over his mother's contact. How many times had she tried to reach him, only for him to ignore her calls? How many times had she asked him to visit, only for him to make excuses? The weight of those missed moments pressed down on him like a crushing burden. He wanted to call her, to tell her he was sorry, to beg for her forgiveness. But what could he say that would undo the years of pain he had caused? What words could possibly make up for the betrayal, the disappointment, the heartbreak? He set the phone down, his hands trembling. As the night stretched on, he stared at the skyline, the city lights flickering like distant stars. He made a silent promise to himself, a promise to change, to rebuild not just his life, but his character. He didn't know if his mother would ever forgive him, but he knew he had to try. For the first time in years, he felt something stir within him, a glimmer of hope, a faint echo of the boy he used to be. And in that quiet moment, amidst the darkness of his regret, he realized that the road to redemption would be long and difficult. But it was a road he had to take, not just for himself, but for the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. The woman who had exposed the truth, not to destroy him, but to save him. The son stood outside his mother's modest home, his hands trembling as he held a bouquet of her favorite flowers, jasmine, their delicate fragrance a reminder of the simpler days they had shared. It had been years since he had knocked on this door, years since he had come to her without pride or excuses, but tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't the self-made millionaire, the untouchable businessman. Tonight, he was just a son, burdened with regret and desperate for forgiveness. He hesitated, staring at the chipped paint on the door that had once felt like a sanctuary. Memories flooded his mind, of running into this house after school, of her warm embrace, of the meals she had lovingly prepared no matter how tired she was. Those moments felt like a lifetime ago, and yet the love that had filled them lingered, giving him the courage to knock. When the door opened, he was greeted by the woman who had always been his strength. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and guardedness. For a moment, they simply stood there, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between them. "Mama," he began, his voice cracking as he tried to hold back the tears threatening to spill. "I'm so sorry." Her eyes softened, but she didn't speak. She stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. He entered the small living room, the familiar scent of home wrapping around him like a balm. But the comfort of the space only deepened his guilt. He placed the flowers on the table, his hands shaking. "I don't know where to start," he said, his voice trembling. I've made so many mistakes. I've hurt so many people, but no one more than you." His mother sat down, her expression calm but weary. "Go on," she said gently, her voice steady. He knelt in front of her, unable to look her in the eye. "You gave up everything for me," he said, his voice breaking. "You worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and all you ever asked was that I be a good man. And I failed you. I lost sight of everything you taught me, everything you believed in." Her silence was heavy, but it pushed him to keep going. "I let my ambition consume me. I made choices I can't take back. I thought I was doing it for the right reasons, but I see now how wrong I was. And when you tried to warn me, when you tried to bring me back, I ignored you. I pushed you away." His voice faltered as tears streamed down his face. "I betrayed your trust, Mama, and I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for that." Finally he looked up, his tear-filled eyes meeting hers. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm begging you for it. Not because I want to feel better, but because I want to make things right. I want to be the son you can be proud of again. I'll do whatever it takes, Mama. Just tell me how to start." His mother reached out, placing her hands on his tear-streaked face. Her touch was soft, but the weight of her emotions was evident. "My son," she said, her voice trembling, "I have always loved you. Even when you strayed, even when you broke my heart, I never stopped loving you." He closed his eyes, her words both a comfort and a burden. "But love doesn't mean there aren't consequences," she continued, her tone firm but kind. "You need to make amends, not just with me, but with everyone you've hurt. That's the only way to truly begin again." He nodded, his tears falling freely now. "I will, Mama. I promise. I'll fix what I can. I'll rebuild, not just my life, but myself." She pulled him into an embrace, her arms wrapping around him tightly. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his guilt lift, replaced by a fragile but powerful hope. I forgive you, she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. But don't just tell me you'll change. Show me. They stayed like that for a while, mother and son, holding on to each other as if trying to mend the broken pieces of their bond. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but in that moment, the strength of their love shone brighter than the pain of the past. It was a new beginning, one born of regret, forgiveness, and a shared determination to heal. The warmth of their embrace lingered as the son pulled back, his eyes still red from tears. He sat across from his mother now, their conversation shifting from apology to something deeper, hope. The room was silent, except for the steady ticking of the old clock on the wall, a gentle reminder that time moved forward, and so could they. I forgive you, his mother said again, her voice softer now. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Trust is something that must be earned, my son, and it won't happen overnight. I understand, Mama, he replied, his tone resolute. I know I've lost that trust, and I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to rebuild it. I don't want to be the man I've been. I want to be someone you can be proud of again. She nodded, her expression a mixture of love and caution. This isn't just about me, you know. It's about the people you've hurt along the way. If you truly want to rebuild, you need to start by making amends, not just in words, but in actions. He looked down, his hands clasped tightly together. I've been thinking about that. There are families, businesses, people who've suffered because of my choices. I can't undo what's been done, but I can try to make it right. I want to use what I have left to help them. Her eyes softened, and a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. That's a good start, she said. But it won't be easy. Some people may not forgive you, no matter what you do. I know, he said, meeting her gaze. But I'm willing to face that. I don't want to live like this anymore, Mama. I want to do better. For them, for myself, and for you. She reached across the table, taking his hands in hers. You're my son, she said firmly, and no matter what, I will always love you. But love and trust are not the same. Trust must be earned through patience, honesty, and consistency. Are you ready for that? He nodded, his grip tightening around her hands. Yes, I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes for as long as it takes. They sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of the past slowly lifting as they made an unspoken vow to move forward. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of doubt, setbacks, and hard conversations. But for the first time in years, they were on the same path, united by a shared determination to heal what had been broken. I'll hold you to that promise, she said with a faint smile, her voice tinged with both hope and caution. And I'll be here to guide you, but the work is yours to do. I know, he replied, a sense of clarity settling over him. And I'll prove to you that I can change, not just for you, but for myself. The sound of the clock ticking filled the room as they sat together, the tension replaced by a quiet sense of resolve. They didn't need grand declarations or immediate results. This moment, this understanding between them, was enough to begin. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future, one step at a time. As he stood to leave, his mother walked him to the door. Before he stepped out, she placed a hand on his shoulder. Remember, she said gently, redemption isn't about perfection. It's about effort and the willingness to try every single day. I won't forget, he said, his voice steady with determination. And as he walked away, the weight of his guilt felt lighter. He wasn't just leaving her home. He was leaving behind the man he had been, ready to rebuild the life and relationships that truly mattered. For the first time in years, both mother and son felt the stirrings of hope, knowing that healing wasn't just a possibility, it was a promise. Together, they would move forward, bound by love and the unshakable belief that even broken trust could be mended with time. As the story came full circle, the mother and son's journey left a profound message, not just for them, but for anyone watching. It was a story of love, loss, redemption, and the enduring strength of family. The son had learned the hard way that success without integrity was hollow, a fleeting illusion that could never fill the emptiness left by broken values and relationships. But through his mother's unwavering courage, he found his way back to what truly mattered. Family is not just about blood. It's about the bonds we nurture, the trust we build, and the love we give unconditionally. It's about holding each other accountable, even when it's painful, and believing in each other's potential for change. The mother's decision to stand up, even when it meant exposing her son's darkest secrets, was not an act of betrayal, it was an act of love, the kind that demands truth and integrity above all else. The son's journey reminds us that redemption is always possible, but it requires humility, courage, and the willingness to confront our mistakes. It's not an easy path, and it doesn't come with guarantees, but it's a path worth taking. Through his actions to rebuild trust and make amends, he showed that even the deepest wounds could heal when faced with honesty and effort. As the mother said, redemption isn't about perfection, it's about effort. This lesson resonates deeply. The courage to stand for what is right, even when it's difficult, can lead to healing, growth, and a future filled with purpose. The story leaves us with this powerful truth. Wealth, power, and status may fade, but the values we hold and the relationships we cherish are what truly endure. No success is worth sacrificing our integrity, and no failure is beyond redemption when we choose to face the truth. So as the screen fades to black, the message lingers. Love, truth, and integrity are the foundations of a meaningful life. No matter how far we may stray, it's never too late to return to what matters most. And in the end, the courage to stand for the truth, even when it hurts, is the greatest gift we can give, to ourselves, to those we love, and to the world.